NVIDIA just dropped the next generation RTX 4080 and 4090 graphics cards, and here's everything you need to know. The RTX 4080 is going to come in with two different models, one with 12GB and another with 16GB, both utilizing GDDR6 as memory. The 12GB model, which is currently the cheapest 40 series card, is going to start at $899 USD and will only be AIB produced. The 16GB is 25% more expensive, but you get 25% more memory, as it is $1199 for the Founders Edition. However, the 4080 models vary in more ways than just memory. The 12GB model boasts 7,680 CUDA cores and a 2600 MHz boost clock, while the higher-end 16GB model ups the core count to 9,728, but has to drop the clock speed to around 2500 MHz. So the 16GB 4080 features a bit more horsepower in other areas outside of just more memory, like a 256-bit memory bus as well. NVIDIA did also mention that they've managed to hit clock speeds of around 3000 MHz, so you can probably expect some AIB cards to be pushing that speed once they release. Brief notes on performance, and NVIDIA did the same thing last time around using DLSS 3.0, which more on that later, but their graph showed around a doubling of performance using DLSS 3.0, which generally translates to a 40 to 50% increase in performance without DLSS turned on, if the past is anything to go by. A final spec to note is power consumption, which also was better than expected going into the announcement. The 12GB 4080 will consume 285 watts, at least at the Founder spec, and the 16GB model 320 watts. This is interesting, as even at 320 watts, it's actually lower than the 3080 Ti. Happy to see NVIDIA not blowing the lid off power consumption. Both 4080 models will launch in November. Next up is the piece de resistance of the keynote, the RTX 4090. This thing is an absolute monster, with 24 GB of GDDR6 at memory, 16,384 CUDA cores, a 2,520 MHz boost clock, or 3000 again if you push it, and a 384-bit memory width. Also monstrous is the price tag, coming in at $1,599 USD, which, being honest, was a bit lower than I expected, but is still pretty insane. Power consumption for the 4090 was also better than expected heading into the keynote. Some rumors and leaks were saying NVIDIA might push 500 to 600 watts on the 4090, but as it turns out, NVIDIA has it spec'd at 450 watts, which is still a lot of power, but again, more reasonable than first indicated. You can expect AIB cards to maybe push it up to 475, 480, but I believe NVIDIA will enforce keeping things below 500. Once again, NVIDIA played with the performance numbers, using DLSS 3.0, and showed a doubling of performance, which translates to 40-50% increase without DLSS given past precedent. Recapping the technology that's featured across all of the cards, the 40 series is built on NVIDIA's new Ada Lovelace architecture, or Ada for short, and features new 3rd generation ray tracing cores and 4th generation tensor cores, which will help with ray tracing and DLSS. Speaking of DLSS, NVIDIA unveiled possibly the coolest technology at the event, which was DLSS 3.0, a superset of DLSS 2.0. DLSS 3.0's big claim to fame is frame generation. And what that does is basically interpolate the next frame coming up based on the previous frame using AI magic. It's really cool technology and is going to require software developers to implement. But if NVIDIA's performance numbers are anything to go by, then the gains are significant. There are a few catches though. NVIDIA has locked the frame generation in DLSS 3.0 to the 40 series, and when asked about it on Twitter, Brian Catanzaro, NVIDIA's VP of Applied Deep Learning Research, said that it's because DLSS in general relies on the optical flow accelerator, which has been on NVIDIA GPUs since Turing. However, DLSS 3.0 won't work on 30 series and below, despite the accelerator technically being present. According to Catanzaro, the frame generator relies on the improved accelerator only present on the 40 series. DLSS 3.0 is comprised of 3 parts: the aforementioned frame generator, but also DLSS Super Resolution and NVIDIA Reflex, both of which have had their AI models improved, so even older cards will be able to benefit from these improvements, but just not the frame generator. at least according to NVIDIA's marketing, which, quite frankly, is deceptive enough to try and get people to believe that DLSS 3.0 as a whole is exclusive to the 40 series, but that doesn't seem to be the case. My god, they are worse than Apple. With the important tech specs out of the way, let's break down what we got here. People are rather upset about locking of the frame generator to the 40 series, as that seems to be the key new feature of DLSS 3.0 for the most performance gains, and there was really not a good technical reason given outside of the 40 series to just better her. Addressing the assumptions about power consumption that were made going into the press conference based on the trends of the 30 series, many, and ourselves included, assumed that in order to improve more performance, NVIDIA would lean more into throwing more power at the problem. The 40 series is manufactured on a new 4N process node by TSMC, which NVIDIA claims allowed them to keep things reasonable. But with these power numbers and indicated performance improvements, it speaks to how much more robust Ada is as an architecture, and NVIDIA made significant improvements over Ampere. The doubling in performance, at least in Flight Sim, was a better increase than even some of the most generous rumors said. Another positive note is the 40 series is going to be reasonable to cool, which is great because I really didn't want to add a second radiator to my build. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the pricing, and just what the hell is going on there. NVIDIA's rather high pricing of the 40 series seems to confirm NVIDIA's intention to sell both the 40 and the 30 series cards in parallel to each other for at least the next year. The 30 series has received significant price cuts, one such example being the 3090 Ti, which can be found for around 1,080 USD new, less than half of its original MSRP. So if it seems like NVIDIA is trying to price people out of the 40 series, it's because they are. They still want you to be considering the 30 series as a viable option in order to move as much of that now overproduced inventory as possible. If you want to upgrade, you have to perform the calculus of is a possible doubling in performance across intensive games worth the $500 premium to jump from getting a 3090 Ti to a 4090. With the way the economy is going right now, I would assume a lot of people will opt for the cheaper option and pick themselves up a 30 series card, especially considering that it looks like there will be more drastic price cuts to the 30 series as well. So let us know down in the comments what you think of the 40 series and whether or not you'll get a 30 series or a 40 series card if you want to upgrade. In related news, AMD announced that their RDNA 3 conference will take place November 3rd, so make sure you're subscribed for our coverage of that. Check out our video here about who the best AIB might be heading into the 40 series, and I'll see you in the next one.